Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier with my second presentation on Prohibition. And I'm going to start off where I left things in my last presentation. Public opinion had turned against Prohibition and the crime it created in its wake. Millions of Americans simply liked to drink. It didn't affect their work or their home life, and as far as they were concerned, they had been deprived an innocent habit. There had always been people against Prohibition, but they had been slow to see the power of the movement in favour of it. But now, powerful groups began to raise their voice against the act. The big brewers and distillers were of course against it. Hotel owners were also against it. In both cases it hit their profits, though they also argued that it meant they employed less people. But there were other groups, other organisations from across society that began to lobby against the act, and the Association Against the Prohibition Amendment began to find its membership and its budget increasing. The association blamed Prohibition for society's problems in much the same way as the Anti-Saloon League had argued for Prohibition, and it used similar tactics, backing wet candidates in elections, running campaigns in newspapers and magazines, criticising its opponents and producing its literature blaming Prohibition for every social ill from unemployment and poverty to crime. Unusually, the two sides of industry found themselves in agreement. The American Federation of Labour's view was quite straightforward. People were entitled to a drink after a day's work, whilst rich industrialists looked at the increased taxes they were paying. Federal taxes had increased sixfold between 1916 and 1921, when from 1920 tax revenue from alcohol had of course been reduced to zero. But there were other, perhaps more surprising opponents joining the fight too. The Voluntary Committee of Lawyers claimed that Prohibition was unconstitutional on the grounds that it attacked Americans' personal freedom, whereas the American Legion came to oppose it because people were losing respect for the law. Prohibition had, after all, created criminals from bootleggers to smugglers to gangsters to drinkers to policemen. Society women also argued against Prohibition, just as the Women's Christian Temperance Union had argued in favour of it. In 1929, Pauline Sabin, an intelligent and rich member of the Manhattan Smart Set, founded the Women's Organization for National Prohibition Reform. Her tactic was to ridicule the act and the boring women who supported the Anti-Saloon League. By 1932, her organisation had 1 million members. The table had been well and truly turned. What's more, the onset of the Great Depression and mass unemployment only added to the argument in favour of repealing Prohibition. The Great Depression had devastated America, and with money desperately needed to support people as well as create jobs, it was felt that there was little point in spending money on enforcing something that could not be enforced, at the same time as tax revenues were not being collected, and ending Prohibition would create jobs. In the 1932 election, the Democrat candidate Franklin D. Roosevelt campaigned for an end to Prohibition, and with the election won, the 18th Amendment Act was duly repealed by the 21st Amendment, and Prohibition ended on December the 5th, 1935. It had lasted 15 years. Yet the repeal only restored drinking laws to individual states, and in fact 7 states decided to continue to ban alcohol. Now, these are the kind of things we can look at in more detail in tutorials, if you're up for that. Exploring how we analyse effectively and evaluate effectively, all the time linking our work to past questions. Have a word with your parents if you're interested, and don't worry about the cost. I'm very happy to negotiate what your parents can afford. So if you're interested, get in touch with me at historymadeeasier@gmail.com, or get your parents to, and we'll see if I have a slot available. But for now, let me thank you for listening and wish you the very best of luck with your studies. A very hearty cheers this week.